Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our webinar this evening. Tonight is our 86th webinar. It's our second context session. So tonight we're looking at social work and mental health. We've got an amazing panel of guests who are going to be sharing expertise and practice wisdom in lots of different areas of mental health to give you a flavour of what social work in mental health is like and what some of the issues are for social workers working in mental health services. So it's going to be a very busy night. We've got a lot to get through. So we're not going to spend very long in this introduction, but you know that we generally just ask you as you come in to introduce yourself. Make sure your chat is set to everybody. Introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us a little bit about you. Tell us where you are in the world. We like to see when we go international. So tell us where you are in the world. Tell us what you've had for your tea, if you like, or tell us if the weather's good where you are, or tell us if you're looking forward to having a couple of days off. Some people might be having a couple of days bank holiday off. Some of you might be working through the bank holiday. Whatever you want to tell us. I mean, you can tell us your whole life story if you want to in the chat. We are completely open to whatever you would like to share with us. Hi, Em is studying at, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, university in Canada. That's fabulous. So we've gone international already. And I can see that we've got people joining us from all over the UK as well. So if you're a student, let us know if you're a student, if you're a social worker, if you're a newly qualified worker, you're a practice educator. I can see David in the audience. It's lovely to see you again, David, even though I can't actually see you. It's nice that you're here. We've got a social worker from America joining us tonight too, Adriana. So fabulous. It's wonderful to have so many guests from other contexts and countries as well. A social worker in a psychiatric department in the Maldives. That's amazing. So what we're going to have tonight in the chat is lots of, I think, learning from different countries. We'll be still talking about the context of mental health, but the context of mental health in the Maldives and Canada and America and the UK is going to be very different. So I think the chat tonight will be very vibrant, I can imagine. As we go through things. So I'm going to just get straight into the session tonight, I think, because there is so much to do. As I've said, I was thinking about this image because all over the news this week in England or the UK, there's been a lot of talk about holidays and people holidaying and all of that. So I was thinking about packing, like things being packed, and actually tonight is an incredibly packed night. So the image there of literally taking everything with you on your holidays, we have literally packed everything into tonight. We've got 4 amazing guests who are going to introduce themselves one by one as we get to their part of the session. That means that we're probably going to have such a packed program tonight. We're probably not going to have time for questions and answers in a traditional way, but all of our guests are here with us and they'll be joining you in the chat. So if you want to ask questions in the chat, then our guest speakers will be able to respond to you in the chat. So do use the chat to connect with one another. And I think our team will be helping you to think about how to use the chat and make sure that it's all set appropriately. But I'm not going to mess about any longer. I'm going to go straight on into our first guest. As I said, each guest is going to introduce themselves, but I'm going to start off by just telling you about Helen. When we decided we were going to do a context session on mental health, we thought we have to ask Helen to come along as a guest because Helen has been a member of our webinar audience, I think, since the beginning. And we see, and Helen's always there in the chat, always joining in the chat. So we thought we're going to have to ask Helen to come along because when you introduce yourselves at the beginning, and Helen always introduces herself as a mental health social worker, I think she's probably the mental health social worker who has been at the most sessions with us. So I'm going to hand straight over to you, Helen, if you're ready.
Yes, Thank you, Siobhan. So really pleased to be here tonight. My name's Helen Sheppard. As Siobhan said, I'm a mental health social worker, qualified since 2003, and worked across a number of different teams, including community mental health team, assertive outreach team, and early intervention in psychosis team, and currently supporting for Think Ahead trainee social workers. So a variety of jobs, and I have been an AMP as well, but I'm currently not approved as a result of working for the NHS. So that's a brief introduction to me. So I'm really pleased to be here, and I will start. So I thought to introduce the sort of session, it'd be useful just to think of some key facts around people with mental health diagnosis, and the fact that they are more likely than the general population to be homeless, to misuse alcohol and substances, and apologies for the spelling error, have a lower life expectancy, which has resulted in a much more physical health monitoring within mental health services, which is a good thing. Be a victim of crime. So unlike the media would want us to think that people with mental health problems are more likely to commit the crime. And just to sort of give an example, sort of a relative of mine who was unfortunately murdered had a mental health diagnosis of bipolar, and when the person that was convicted of the murder appealed against this, it was mentioned, you know, that he had a mental health problem, that he had medication, and that it was likely that he hadn't been taking it. So therefore putting some of the blame onto him for the fact that he was the victim of an horrendous crime. So that's just an example. So be unemployed, which within mental health services now, we do have a lot of employment workers as well involved. So, you know, that's important within mental health services. So next, I didn't want to say next slide, but, and then key facts continued include have experienced sexual abuse, more likely to have been bullied, following on from the recent book launch, more likely to have been care experienced violence in the home, or run away from home as a young person. So they're the sort of an overview really, and a very brief overview of the key facts and what I suppose what we're faced with when we're working in mental health. So I've found this quote that I thought was actually quite helpful in thinking about the importance of social work and a rights-based approach to mental health. So it's from the World Health Organization, and it focuses on the predominant focus of care in many contexts continues to be on diagnosis, medication, and symptom reduction. Critical social determinants that impact on people's mental health, such as violence, discrimination, poverty, social exclusion, isolation, job insecurity, or unemployment. Sorry, the list is long. Lack of access to housing, social safety nets, and health services are often overlooked or excluded from mental health concepts and practice. And this leads to an overdiagnosis of human distress and over-reliance on psychotropic drugs to the detriment of psychosocial interventions. And this is a phenomenon which has been well documented over the years. So that sort of presents a picture that suggests that social work has a key role to play within mental health service. So this, again, this is a quote that I found from a survivor user network. So placing the importance of social work in mental health. So social work is in a good position to consider the whole person rather than the dominant medical model when it came to mental health social work, the physical, mental and social well-being of people. Social work looks at person's history, not just their behaviour and medication, and can help service users think beyond the medical model. Relationship-based work is an important role of social work, and social workers are well placed to support people through a system. So taking account of everything involved with the person, the environment, everything that was now mentioned earlier, and the relationship-based work that we do as social workers that we spoke about in the webinar last week is key. So why is social work important in mental health? So thinking about our own knowledge, skills and values within social work, and I think Megan will bring in some of this as well. Focusing on social justice and human rights. So, for example, making people aware of their rights, especially, you know, under the Mental Health Act and Care Act, Mental Capacity Act. So having knowledge of those key pieces of legislation, which we learn about in our training and use every day at work. So we're best placed, well, I feel we're best placed because we learn about those, they're core part of our training. We have awareness of inequality, oppression and discrimination, and bringing that into the work and being able to challenge that when appropriate and needed. And we promote recovery and social inclusion, which is key to recovery within mental health. And some of the concepts within mental health now have actually, you know, have been not stolen, but taken from social work. So recovery, strength-based approach, psychosocial interventions is what social work was doing before the whole of the mental health system took it on. So they're all key to working within mental health. So in terms of like the thinking about the social model, it's just some sort of key points there. So we do promote the social model. That isn't to say that the medical model is, you know, totally not taken account of. Every approach is needed within mental health, but as social workers working within mental health, we promote that understanding of the structural inequalities that impact on people's mental health, on people's lives. And like it says, thinking about impact of relationship support networks and everything that's going on for that person. So we need to understand mental illness in the context of people's relationships and their environment. So I just thought, because I've heard Siobhan speak so many times, I had to mention what, why and how. And I know that if we ignore the why, that we're focusing on medical models. So I applied it to some work that I was doing and thought this might just demonstrate it. It's sort of quite a brief example of applying this. So I was working with a woman. So what she presented with often was low mood, suicidal thoughts and plans. She had a lack of motivation and she was very isolated. So the doctor prescribed some medication, including an antipsychotic and an antidepressant. And at one point, she was admitted to hospital under Section 2 of the Mental Health Act. And it was very distressing for her. throughout this period. But what I felt, and I did discuss within the multidisciplinary team, was the why. And to me, the why was that she was an asylum seeker. She lived in inappropriate housing, which was basically a 2-bedroom house for 6 people, which was basically her and her 5 children. She'd experienced numerous losses in terms of loss of status, because she had a good job in the country that she'd left, loss of income because she was dependent on the amount of money that the government give to asylum seekers, loss of partner because he was currently in another country, and the isolation due to COVID-19, and they all impacted at the time on her mental health. When she was talking to me and building that relationship with her, the key points were that she wanted to work, but she couldn't work because of the law and her immigration status. So the outcome was that once the COVID restrictions were reduced, we looked at accessing local resources within the community, and she began volunteering at a local food bank and attended a photography group for asylum seekers, and they did a display of photographs. It was, you know, really positive to see. Her mood improved without the need to change the medication again, because the psychiatrist wanted to continually change the medication. And my view at the time was medication isn't really going to do much, keep changing it, because it's her social circumstances that are really impacting on her mental health at the moment, and with everything that was going on. So, like I say, without considering the why, there would be focus on medication only and whether hospital was required. So that is just my brief example of using that framework. And then, so what I thought was then just to very briefly mention, how do we promote and keep our professional identity within a mainly health dominated setting? So what we've done within Bradford is we have a social work forum that meets each month, and we meet up, have training sessions. We've made links with other trusts, including one of the other speakers tonight, and we share training sessions, share ideas. We've have Think Ahead trainee social workers, which is raising the profile of the trust and social work within the trust, and apprenticeships. And we have a dedicated section now on the social worker role on the trust website. And recently, this week, in fact, we now have a trust social work Twitter page. So, and that's all from me. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Helen. That really gave us a really good broad introduction into mental health in the UK. As I was listening to it, I was thinking about, you know, the people from other countries and whether the context is the same, because I believe in America, you know, social work is, most mental health services are provided by social workers. That's my understanding. Whereas for us, we're more of a minority in terms of mental health provision. And I think that came through really clearly. What I really liked, though, Helen, was your real focus on oppression and discrimination, social justice, because for me, when I started my career in mental health, and I always used to think there's almost like this chicken and egg thing, isn't there, around oppression and discrimination? Because for me, a lot of oppression and discrimination can lead into mental health concerns, but mental health concerns will lead to oppression and discrimination, and it becomes a vicious cycle, really, that only social workers can, you know, we can try and help to break that, but sometimes we actually become part of that. So I think you really highlighted that really clearly. So thank you very much for that. That was a great intro for us. And we're going to go on now to, again, someone who's joined us very often in the webinars. And I think when we first said we're going to do a mental health context webinar, then Megan contacted us. And at that point, Megan, I think you were very newly qualified. I think you'd kind of just graduated perhaps, and yet now it's taken us so long to get round to this context session, because we planned so far in advance, that actually I think you're quite a way through your ASYE year now, aren't you, Megan? So if I hand over to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I finished my ASYE in 3 months, so it's absolutely flown by. I work within an inpatient mental health hospital within Kent County Council. So yeah, I graduated in June last year, then joined my role in July and started at ASYE in September. So one of the things that Siobhan and I discussed was really just the reflections that I've made being newly qualified within the mental health services. My final placement, my 100-day placement, was within a forensic mental health setting, which sort of kick-started my passion for mental health, really. And yeah, I can't really see myself going out of mental health now. It is definitely my passion, I think. So one of the first things that I did want to speak about, which you probably all hear about quite a lot on the first slide, is about multidisciplinary team working. One of the things that one of the things that we spoke about a lot at university. Yeah, it was always emphasised to us at university, and I think throughout my ASYE it has really been proven how essential this is. And within my role, we work with a range of agencies, so community social workers, housing, fire and rescue service, health colleagues. We work with everyone across the board, really. And I think the main point I wanted to make about MDT working, for short, is how important it is to have these opportunities to share the information with the other professionals that you are working with. And it makes such a difference in safeguarding as well, because there have been many times where somebody that I'm working with has disclosed some information to me that we share with the safeguarding team under Section 42 of the Care Act. And having those other professionals involved as well, with, you know, everyone has a different area of expertise, so there may be something that might be best managed by the GP, for example, or the police. So having this team working together helps you to work towards better outcomes for the people that you are working with. So I thought that was probably the best thing to start on, really, that sort of came out for me. But saying that, I think it does link quite well to my second slide. When we're talking about the best outcomes for people that we work with, unfortunately, we do have a lack of resources, which again is probably something that is mentioned not just within mental health, but within all parts of social work. I work with a lot of people that benefit from having support workers going into their home after they've left hospital, just supporting them with regaining confidence and just having that independence again after their stay in hospital. But something that we have found that is quite common, unfortunately, throughout my job so far, is that the waiting list for these support workers can be very long. And it's obviously frustrating because, you know, sometimes these people are well enough to leave hospital, but their social care needs may very well be the thing that could bring them back into hospital if those needs aren't met. And we work as hard as we can to find alternatives if possible, but that isn't always possible. So there is that constant frustration of trying to work as hard but as quickly as you can to find those things that are desperately needed. And I think one of the things that really highlights this is that I read the Waiting for Care report that was published by ADAS, I think it was early this month, and it shows from this report that within the first 3 months of this year, almost 170,000 hours a week of home care could not be delivered due to a shortage of care workers, which is a 7-fold increase in this time last year, which just shows how significant the needs are, and they aren't always being met, which is incredibly unfortunate, but that is the reality of what is happening right now. And with the people that I work with in hospital, if they have, you know, eligible social care needs, then we would pass the information onto our community team so they can be reviewed. when they're back at home, make sure the care and support is still suitable for them. And sometimes there are those delays in getting that support in place, and it just seems at the moment very common having those delays, unfortunately. The next thing that I wanted to speak about, which again is probably something that's very often mentioned, is trauma-informed practice. And over the last few months of being within this role, I've realised how much of a huge part this plays in people's lives, and sometimes their mental illnesses and the behaviours that are associated with that could be the reactions of the trauma that they either are going through now or they have already been through. And I found that it is increasingly common for the people I work with to have gone through trauma, whether that is a breakdown of relationships, domestic abuse, bereavement, or anything like that. I did complete my dissertation at university around the long-lasting effects of emotional abuse on children as they go into adulthood. And I think that has really put it into context for me, being in this job, at how common it is for survivors of that abuse to experience these mental health difficulties. And something that I thought would be really good to mention as well is a study that a colleague of mine shared with me. It's called A Paradigm Shift: Relationships in Trauma-Informed and Mental Health Services, but we can share that in the resources. This study, I thought, provided a great amount of information about trauma and managing this within mental health settings, and it spoke quite a bit about re-traumatisation, which I hadn't thought much about previously. And they gave a brilliant case study of this as well, which I thought I'd briefly mention. So it was about a lady who was anonymously referred to as Claire. And in this situation, Claire had been admitted to hospital. The staff were concerned that she would either self-harm or attempt suicide again. So she was put on what they call round-the-clock observations, one-to-one observations. She was naturally a private lady, and she found the constant supervision to be humiliating. The staff members didn't interact much with her, and she felt punished rather than supported. And she had, throughout her childhood, she had a lack of privacy and was constantly intruded on, and this brought back this trauma for her. They then spoke about what it would look like for Claire if she was to be within a ward that was trauma-informed. And within this, they gave examples of that the ward would understand that round-the-clock observations can cause long-term harm, that they would speak with Claire to explain the reasons for the observations and what their concerns are. Staff are as interactive as possible, and they attempt to validate her feelings so that she feels supported rather than punished. And I found that this situation has been very relevant for the people that I work with, as a lot of them have, usually within the first week or so of their stay in hospital, have been on one-to-one observations. And it just really highlighted for me how traumatizing that can be, which is something that I hadn't considered or really thought about for a while, but it really opened my eyes to that. They do have a paragraph at the end of the study as well, which I thought was, again, really good, something to really take into account with trauma-informed practice. They listed some principles of trauma-informed practice, such as seeing through a trauma lens, so knowing and understanding the prevalence, the signs and effects of trauma, appreciation of invisible trauma, such as poverty and racism, having sensitive discussions about trauma, such as not asking them they're in crisis, and also being trustworthy, transparent, collaborating with them, and having that choice and control as well, which I think, again, is something that fits very well within mental health hospitals. So I think that sort of leads on quite well to my next slide as well, around language. Now, this is something that I do speak about quite a lot with my colleagues and in supervision with my supervisor. I think there's something that I've mentioned probably nearly every time. And I feel like it's been something that's just in my mind all the time. I think we focus on it quite a lot at university. I feel like it was almost ingrained in us how important language is, and I'm so grateful for that, because that has stuck in my mind ever since. So one of the latest things I sort of reflected on with my supervisor was how often I see the phrase, "this person suffers with this illness." And as soon as I see the word sufferer, it just instantly creates this, you know, this negative depiction, and that they don't seem to realise sometimes that language can be really damaging. I also often hear the phrases, they didn't engage, or they're displaying challenging behaviour, which again instantly puts the blame on other people as to how they're feeling, when perhaps we need to change our approach to the conversations that we're having with them, so that they feel that they can have those conversations with us more. And again, this links very well onto stigma as well. I find that people are often taken aback when I speak to them about the fact that I work in a mental health hospital. I often hear like the phrases mental asylums, or you're working with psychos. So those types of, you know, really degrading language. And I do challenge this every time, no matter who it is that says that to me. I'm glad that it's not been anyone within the profession that has said something like that to me. It tends to be people that aren't in the profession. I mean, like, I've had conversations with my own family and friends, and they're not within the social work sector or mental health sector. And I've had these conversations with them, and they have said they felt like they've learned a lot from me, which is great, because I feel like I'm making even the smallest of differences having these conversations with people, and just trying to lessen that stigma as much as we can. The Mental Health Foundation have some good information about stigma as well. They did a survey a few years ago, and I think around 90% of those who were surveyed have experienced stigma around their mental health conditions. And as well, I think Helen touched on this, but what you see in news stories over the years, I've seen so many stories where people with mental health conditions are seen as evil and dangerous, and that doesn't help towards the stigma of these people that we work with. So any education, I suppose, or challenging these beliefs is really important to me as well. So it has been a bit of a negative bit there, but there are two things that I wanted to talk about as well. And the next one is strengths-based practice. So it sort of flips it on his head a bit, which is good. Now, this for me has been absolutely essential to building good relationships with people that I work with. And I do find that strengths aren't always easy to identify straight away within yourself. If someone was to say to me, what are your strengths? And I'd probably go a bit blank, I wouldn't really know what to say, or you don't want to sound like a show off, I suppose. So when I'm working within this strengths-based fashion, people that I work with, you have to think of things differently, or just word your conversations differently to be able to get these strengths out of people. So it could be, you know, talking to them about what they enjoy doing, about their support networks, about their goals, amongst many other things. And these strengths, I find that I try to find anything as a strength, so whether it's those conversations with their parents have every week, having a pet, having a favourite TV show they like, they're all strengths. I feel like it's so important to really recognise that for them. And I think this links on quite well to the last slide as well, which is about wellbeing and person-centred practice. One of the things that I always say is obviously never underestimate how much things can mean to people. And I always think of this one example of a lady I worked with a few months ago. She didn't have a large support network around her. The nursing staff were concerned that she lived alone, didn't have any family around, and she had only one friend. So I decided to have an open and honest conversation with her. And she explained to me that she just enjoys her own company. She likes being on her own, watching her TV shows, and that she'd actually be really unhappy if she was to have lots of people coming into her home and trying to help her and support her when she didn't want that, and she didn't feel like she needed it either. So under the Care Act, we do have a duty to promote an individual's wellbeing. We should always have their wellbeing at the forefront when making these decisions and planning any care and support. So I think my main point to take away from wellbeing is that to really listen about what matters to someone, because that is what matters the most. And I have added a quote onto this slide as well, which you might recognise, which says, "Nothing about me without me." So this was penned, I believe, by Andrew Lansley, who was the then Secretary of State for Health, when a publication was released around patients and clinicians in NHS about reaching decisions about treatment together. We talk about this at work quite a lot, so it's very in my mind at the moment as well, but it always sticks with me about the decisions that we are making with people regarding the care and support for them. And I think it's just that's such an insightful quote into, you know, making these decisions with people and not for them. So I thought that'd be quite a nice quote to end on. I mean, if that's one thing you remember that quote. It always works for me.
Thank you so much for that, Megan. That was fabulous. It was really interesting just to hear your reflections as someone new to social work with people with mental health issues. I think that was really helpful and really interesting. You picked out some really key points. And I also just like the way that you shared the reality for people. I think that's important. We have lots of students that are with us, and hearing that reality matters. I always sort of, whenever I'm listening to anybody, I always think about what it might mean for me, and it means different things to us on, you know, different stages of our journey. But it really made me realise how mental health is political. There is so many politics around it, in the same way social work is political. But I was thinking about, you know, you talking about the care crisis. Well, of course, we've been told by our Prime Minister in the UK, Boris Johnson, the care crisis is solved. It's all solved. But the reality that we're living every day is actually things are getting worse and things are getting more difficult. So thank you very much for sharing that. And that I really liked the learning about re-traumatization as well, because I think that's something that we need to learn a lot more about and reflect a lot more on as social workers, how social work can re-traumatize. So thank you so much for sharing with us, Megan. That was great. Thank you. We're going to go now and hand over to a social worker again, who will introduce himself. But Soyeb I've been doing some work recently with Soyeb, and I've always been just really incredibly impressed by Soyeb. So I'm handing over to you now, if that's all right, Soyeb. Straight to you.
Yes, thanks, Siobhan. Really humbling to hear that. I hope I can contribute something. I think it's hard to follow after Megan and Helen there, so you've set a really good standard there. So yeah, I'm a mental health social worker. I work within an NHS Trust, and I work in a geographical area where there's a high South Asian kind of Muslim community as well, which is why I've got an interest in this area. So just to give some context to the subject area, really, I think it's really important for us to kind of remember why we come into social work. And I always say to kind of students and newly qualified, and they probably get sick of me saying this, I think as you kind of get old like me and start thinking about retiring, it's always important to kind of remember why you came into social work. So I came into social work because I had a disabled sister who was absolutely fine till she was about the age of 8. Then she suddenly developed a physical health issue, which the doctors never kind of worked out what it was, but she just started to deteriorate. So basically one night she woke up and she couldn't walk. And then from then on, it kind of just deteriorated to the fact that she couldn't do anything. So she couldn't talk, she couldn't feed herself. And my mom and dad, they were from originally from India, and we had a lot of I was a lot younger than my sister, so I was quite young when this happened. But I remember a lot of our cousins and friends would come to our house and advise my mom and dad to kind of seek spiritual treatment because they were saying the doctors can't explain what's going on. So there must be something spiritual going on. There must be some kind of black magic or jinn possession or something like that going on. So very early on, I kind of cottoned on to this. In terms of my mental health experience, and I've worked in mental health for too many years now, I think nearly 25 years. And because I work with a lot of South Asian patients and service users, we've seen people accessing services more and more. Initially, when I came into service, we had most of the community we served, they tended to go to spiritual healers, the local priests for mental health support. And it was really interesting when I came into a social work team as well, because I think I was the first South Asian Muslim social worker in the team, the only male social worker as well. So I got dumped with all the cases that were forensics or risky in terms of physical assaults and things like that, because I'm male. Apparently I could handle that. So that terrified me. And I got referred all the cases where there was any element of language issues or cultural issues. I think people assumed I spoke every language under the sun. So whether it was Punjabi, Urdu, Gujarati, so I very quickly had to learn some languages just so I could kind of interact with the service users I was being referred to. So that was really interesting. And I think I've just put there, I think it's really good for social workers to have a niche and an interest as well. I think it just keeps us going, it keeps us motivated, and it brings something to the team as well. So if every member of the team kind of has a niche and an interest, we can also have that kind of specialism in a certain area that we can bring to the team. So again, in the team I was in, as soon as there was any mention of spiritual or religious or culture or spiritual healer, anything like that, that would get straight come to me, that those cases would come to me straight away, which I didn't mind. And I think that is the reason why I developed that interest as well. At the same time, I think that can cause complacency as well, because I've got that kind of, I come from a Muslim background myself, from a South Asian background myself. It can cause that complacency as well. So I'll just put it out there. If I say anything wrong today, or you think I've said something incorrect, please do correct me. I think we're always learning, and students always terrify me because they're always correcting me about something or teaching me something. I think I learn more from them than they learn from me sometimes. It'd be really nice to see in the chat what people think what spirituality and culture actually is. And I think I even struggle with those two concepts still. Recently we changed I'm a BIE as well, and recently we changed our forms, and on the form it actually asks about the culture of the relevant person. And when I see previous assessments that have been completed, that section always says NA. No one ever seems to fill that in, and I think it's simply because we're confused ourselves about what spirituality and culture actually is. But anyway, it'd be really nice to see what people think the two things are. So things that I consider, so I've worked with a lot of cases where there's been elements of spirituality. So, you know, we get a referral comes in, there's mental health issues going on. I go out and do the assessment as soon as they see that it's a social worker that's from the same background, same culture, same religion as them. As soon as I walk through the door, you can see that kind of sense of relief, and straight away they say, oh, well, it's not mental health side, it's actually black magic or jinn possession. So very early on, I kind of was dealing with these kind of issues. And I'd say, I mean, I'll talk about some of the cases a little bit later, but I think very early on, I think I've probably dealt with about 80-90% of cases where it was purely mental health and we had to go down the medical model. But it was just kind of considering that aspect. But there is that 10% where I don't know how much people kind of, or how spiritual people are, but there's this 10% where I was just fascinated thinking, this is not the medical model, and I was kind of backed up by the medics and stuff there as well. But I'll come on to that in a little bit. So things that I do consider, this is just something I put together really for today, and really got me thinking about what do I actually consider in terms of when I'm thinking about the spiritual model versus the medical model, because it's really hard, isn't it? Because we work, especially working in the trust, it is the medical model. You know, to have a fight with the psychiatrist, you're very likely to lose, especially if you're the only social worker in that team as well. So you've got to have really good kind of research or evidence-based kind of suggest even a hint of any social work intervention or any spiritual intervention for that matter. So you've got to take some kind of hits, being the only social worker in the team like that. So culture, definitely one. And in terms of culture, I think there's things like, you know, depending on who you're working with, what's their understanding of medication? You know, do they accept medication? Do they understand what medication actually is? Do they actually understand what medication is used for? And then even little things like the word depression and sad, you know, I've worked with a lot of interpreters where we go out and, you know, I'll ask the question, you know, do you feel depressed? And the interpreter will ask them, do you feel sad? And I'll say to the interpreter, I didn't ask that. I actually asked them if they feel depressed, which is completely different to feeling sad. And I think in some cultures, and within a lot of cultures, I'm not just saying this within the South Asian culture, there's still that stigma around mental health as well. So very, you know, early on when I first came into social work again, we'd go out and parents would say to me, oh, you can't diagnose my son as having mental health issues, because we will struggle to find him a suitable wife, and nobody will want to marry him because he's got mental health issues. So we still have kind of those kind of issues. Even up to recently, you know, our IAP service, they had a discussion with me around the fact that we're struggling to get referrals in for the IAP service from the South Asian community. And I said to them, one of the reasons is because they'd actually, a lot of South, especially the first and second generation, they don't fully understand the concept of IAP and what talking therapy actually is. So we need to kind of change that a little bit so that it's more acceptance to a wide variety of the community we serve. So that's a really kind of interesting thing, but I'm not going to go on to that because I'll start talking too much. Diversity as well. So think about, again, you know, people will often say to me, Shai, we don't need medication, we don't need mental health services, because whatever happens, whether it's good or bad, it comes from God. So we need to accept it, we need to be happy with it. And prayers will kind of resolve those issues if you continue praying, and that will kind of solve our problems. So then you're kind of trying to educate people around what religion actually says, that you should be accepting medication, the medical model as well. And I think parents' background is really important. So again, often we see this, and I used to work in EIP. I think Helen said she's working in EIP as well, you know, where it's supposed to be early intervention psychosis. So you're supposed to intervene early to try and support people. And we take a referral on. They'd say, yeah, first episode, they've just been hearing voices for the last few months, nothing else. And they get to know you a little bit. They understand you're from the same culture background. And then suddenly one day they'll tell you, oh yeah, you know, they've had mental health issues for the last 8 to 9 years, but we've been accessing spiritual support because that's what we thought it was. So, and then you're doing education work with the family around the need for medication and the medical model as well. So you've got that. Spirituality, again, I think is really important. I think if you can capture someone's spirituality, it's a huge benefit, especially in mental health, because that's what motivates people. That's what keeps people going. And often when I'm doing risk assessments, and especially people are feeling suicidal or having thoughts of self-harm and things like that, if I can tap into the spirituality and see that actually they will use their spiritual beliefs or their spirituality to kind of prevent themselves from committing suicide and harming themselves, I think for me, that reduces the risk significantly. Not in all cases, but in majority of cases, I think that's really beneficial. And there's some research to kind of back that up as well. Then I'll kind of take a step back and look at my own kind of unconscious bias and privilege as well. So, like I said, I think because I come from similar background to the community I serve and have similar religious beliefs and cultural beliefs, I need to kind of make sure that I'm interpreting what they're saying correctly as well. Because I've had the privilege of being lucky that I have actually been to India myself, actually seeing the culture that happens in where most of the communities that I work with come from. But actually, at the same time, I've done a social work course. I've been to university. I've been brought up in the UK as well. So I've got that understanding as well. And sometimes I think I get frustrated when I'm working with individuals that haven't had that privilege, and I get frustrated when they're saying, "Oh, we don't need meds." And I've got to kind of take a step back and think to myself, okay, actually, I need to understand where they're coming from with this as well, and kind of take on board what they're saying. Equality is really important. I think it's still a massive issue. I think because it's the medical model, I think we still struggle, especially in the NHS, to even consider the social work model. Never mind kind of the spiritual model as well. So I think that equality of services is still lacking, and we have to be quite creative in how we provide that kind of equality of service, which I'll come on to again in a little bit. And then kind of capturing all of that as a social worker, we're always covering our backs that way. Unfortunately, that's the kind of climate we work in. So you probably really think, okay, if I'm going to consider the spiritual model here, and this person's really risky, what research, what legislation, what evidence base is there for me to be able to evidence that the spiritual model that I'm using is justified and is going to work as well? So yes, you've got to kind of think about that as well. Next slide. Okay, again, just to get that conversation going a little bit, what's your understanding of black magic and jinn possession? Do you actually believe in black magic? Do you believe in jinns? Do you think it's just kind of make-believe? And what's your own beliefs around that? So really be really interested to see that as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I think one of the things I find when I've worked with cases where there has been elements of spiritual beliefs around jinn possession, black magic, I think a lot of kind of reflections come in, or a lot of aspects come in, things like language, culture, religion, and like I said, the medical model conflict. I think Siobhan said there's social work can be political sometimes, and there's a lot of politics that goes on with the MDT meetings as well. So if you're the only social worker, and if you're the only South Asian Muslim social worker in that team that kind of has similar beliefs, or is the only one that kind of believes in black magic and jinn possession and stuff like that yourself, you've got to really stand up and be able to kind of shout around the need for considering someone's spiritual needs, especially if the case is really risky and there's a lot going on. Medics especially can be quite risk evasive, and so you have to really kind of convince people that we need to kind of consider that as well. Safeguarding can come in again because of that kind of stigma, prejudice, lack of understanding. A lot of cases that I work with where there is elements of spirituality, especially where you're working with a young age group and the parents are kind of doing most of the kind of talking and negotiating. There can be, a lot of colleagues will say to me, "Oh, Sean, we need to refer this for safeguarding because the parents are not accessing the medical model. They're refusing admission in hospital. They're refusing medication. So we need to go down the safeguarding route." And I think all that does is sometimes causes even bigger distance between you and the people you're trying to kind of help and support as well. And working with families is really important to kind of do that two-way education as well. So you're trying to educate or work with the team that you're with to kind of get them on your side to say, we need to consider spiritual model here. But you're trying to kind of convince the families to say, you need to consider the medical model as well. So we need to kind of think about both. And I think, again, when I've kind of talked about that kind of research and evidence-based, there is stuff, and there's loads, and usually I do a full day session on this. So I've tried to really kind of minimize it to 3 different things. So, stuff like the Mental Health Act talks about appropriate medical treatment. So one side of my argument is that if somebody's saying that they want to see an exorcist or they want to see a spiritual healer, is that appropriate? But we don't have access to that. So is that appropriate medical treatment? Is it or is it not? I don't know. That's an open argument for reflection, really. We've got stuff like the Human Rights Act, which talks about freedom of thought, belief, and religion. And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because we've got the mental health reform coming out, and I think they will be saying that we need to have spiritual healers in the team, we need to have exorcists in the team. I'm kind of saying that sarcastically. I think we'll see what comes of that. But he talks about the Mental Health Act requiring both legislative change and systematic change as well, and that's really interesting. The systemic change that's needed in mental health, and the need for wider commitments to improve access, experience, and outcomes of minorities' mental health care. So, this is something I was saying 20, 25 years ago. We are still saying the same thing again. So that's really interesting. So in terms of cases, I'm so tempted to talk about some of the cases I work with, just to kind of tell you about those interesting, but I know I can't because there's so many kind of people involved in this webinar, and I'm quite kind of conscious that somebody might know something or someone. But I've worked with cases, like I said, which have really kind of got me thinking. There was a really interesting case once where I worked with somebody, a family that had, their father was admitted into hospital, really kind of psychotic, and the hospital were really struggling to kind of do anything in terms of treatment. There was no improvement after 4 to 5 weeks. Throughout the whole thing, the family were constantly saying, look, my dad needs a spiritual healer, he needs a spiritual healer, he's been possessed by a jinn. That's the only way we're going to resolve this issue. And that case even went down the safeguarding route. And this family somehow managed to get actually a spiritual healer onto the ward. And as soon as they got a spiritual healer on the ward, the next day, this man completely transformed. His mental health improved. He was talking, engaging. So there's an argument there that maybe the meds had just started kicking in the day after, or the fact that finally his needs around spiritual treatment were considered. Just the fact that he was listened to might have made that kind of difference. And there's research there. So there's, McNichol talks about a consultant recommending a spiritual consultation as well as a psychiatric evaluation. And after the spiritual needs were considered, this person was more receptive to psychological interventions. She engaged more, did not fit either diagnosis of schizophrenia or depression. The study also felt that in many cases, religion succeeds much more in bringing relief to those who seek psychotherapeutic interventions. And that kind of says it all, doesn't it? So religion is really important for people, for their identity as well. Another kind of research by Graham talks about spirit possession exorcism in treating a patient who was diagnosed again with paranoid schizophrenia. And in this case, they use both the medical model and they use the spiritual healer as well. And it says the family and the social worker agreed that the patient should remain under supervision of both the spiritual healer, the dervish, and the social worker to enable continuing treatment by both as well. And in conclusion, they write that it is possible and beneficial for practitioners to be involved in both systems and act as a broker between the two, and how important it is to know the patient and the background. And kind of that summarizes what I've been talking about today. One of the things I tend to do is, we're really lucky working in a trust that we've got access to the chaplaincy service. So I know in my capacity, I can't really refer somebody to a spiritual healer, for example, because spiritual healers are not registered, they're not overseen by anybody. And if you went to a spiritual healer, you referred somebody and something went wrong, there's potential that would come back to hit you. So I tend to go through the chaplaincy service because they're there for that spiritual kind of treatment, and they've got access to spiritual healers, and they can do some referrals as well to links that they've got with. And I've just put this in as one slide because I think it's really important that whether you're whatever social worker you are, you need to be aware of both working in adults and children, because the same issues affect both. So mental health, even if the children you're working with might not have mental health issues, their parents might have mental health issues, and vice versa. So you might be working in adults with mental health issues, but then the adults might have children. So you need to be aware of both sectors in terms of working with adults and children. And we've seen cases where even with children, there's been safeguarding and really serious incidents, where children have died because individuals have felt that even children have been possessed by jinns, and they've tried to kind of do an exorcism or somehow, and we've seen cases of Columbia and things like that as well. And I just saw this slide on Twitter last week, and it kind of just, I thought I'd kind of put it in there as a ending slide, really kind of summarizes what I've been talking about in terms of that equal access to services, because we do have services, and we say that it's accessible to everybody, but is it equitable, and is it kind of just this in terms of the way we offer it? Because not everybody has the opportunity to access what they actually want in terms of spiritual treatment. And that's it. Thank you.
Didn't get myself off mute in time there. Thank you so much, Soyab. I think that gave us lots and lots to think about there and was very, really thoughtful. So thank you very much. And I do love this slide. I think it's great as well. We have an absolutely packed night. I told you it's so packed tonight. So we're going to move to our final speaker now, who's going to give us, well, you're going to do us a whole A to Z, Tony, aren't you? So there's so much going on. Soyab, I think you've got some questions to you as well in the Q&A, and there's lots of things going on in the chat. So thank you so much for that, Soyab. I'm going to hand straight on to you, Tony, if that's okay, at a gallop.
Must remember to unmute myself. Ian, there's no truth to the rumour that I'm in the pub, okay? Absolutely none, unfortunately. I'll introduce myself. My name's Tony Dane. I am the principal social worker at DCCI. I have to say that out loud, don't I? I usually introduce myself as good-natured, good-humoured, and occasionally grumpy. Okay, and I have a secret life, so that some of you know. And I'm a social worker. I sometimes forget I'm a social worker, but I'm a particular type of social worker. I'm an approved mental health professional. Okay, so we do mental health act assessments. Most people, they refer to our child protection colleagues as child snatchers. We're adult snatchers. Well, of course, we don't snatch. Okay, we don't have to go to court. We do mental health act assessments. I don't have to go to court. My signature on a piece of paper removes someone's liberty. I can infringe your human rights. It's all legal and above board. So the A to Z of amping. Sonia, there's a tune, isn't there? You gonna play the tune? Does it play? Okay. Okay, never worried about it. So, next slide, please.
Oh, and it worked when we were practicing, and then it's just stopped working.
It did. You have to be old enough to remember it. But anyway, the A to Z of amping, blockbusters. Right. So, I always say at this point, my dad's name was actually Bob. Okay, so you get a P, please, Bob. I asked for an A. So what does AMP stand for? Most people have no idea what an AMP does, never mind what it stands for. And the in joke is around approved mental health practitioner, approved mental health anything, approved mental health. But the P stands for professional. Allegedly, and I think there are probably other AMPs in the room, allegedly I'm a professional. What does that mean? It means I went off to AMP school. Okay, when I went to AMP school, it was in-house. Now it is a postgraduate course at least. People forget that it's AMPs that detain people, okay, at least initially under the Mental Health Act. It's not doctors, okay, it really is AMPs, and we have an awful lot of power and authority invested in this, and we don't always feel it that, but we really do. So I often talk about AMPs being overworked and underpaid, mostly local government civil servants, or all powerful, able to walk on water and remove your liberty with a signature. I often think AMPs are left up the creek without a paddle or boat. Think beds, think Section 12 doctors, think whatever you like. Going to somebody's house and doing a mental health act assessment is no easy task. And I often ask AMPs, why would you do it? Why do you still do it? In 2007, the Mental Health Act was amended to allow other people to do it. OTs, psychologists, nurses of a certain LD nurses and psychiatric nurses, they've rushed to join us. They've absolutely rushed to join us. There are less than 4,000 AMPs in the country. There's about 40 nurse AMPs. There are a handful of occupational therapy AMPs, and there are allegedly 2 psychology AMPs hiding somewhere. I've never met them. I've met some of the nurse AMPs. I've met some of the OT AMPs. Why would you do it? B, beds. We're obsessed with beds. Okay, the NHS is obsessed with beds. AMPs are obsessed with beds. Bed managers, friend or foe, are they helping us or not? I just remind people at this point, and remind the NHS, and I go to these big meetings with NHS or Department of Health and Social Care around the mental health review. I remind them that AMPs don't detain people to beds. AMPs detain people to hospitals. And my second favourite section of the Mental Health Act is Section 140. If it was interactive, I would now say, does anybody know what Section 140 is? Helen, you must know what Section 140 is. It's part of the solution, okay? It means that AMPs in urgent circumstances, it's been part of the law since 1959. AMPs in special urgent circumstances should be allowed to make an application. There were 53,239 detentions under the Mental Health Act last year, okay, in England. That's not 53,000 people. That is people detained several times on Section 2 and people detained from Section 2 to Section 3. So it's probably about 35,000 odd people. And it doesn't include Section 136. There were, depending where you look at your figures, there were either 28,000 136s or 40,000 136s. C stands for the Code of Practice, Mental Health Act Code of Practice. People need to read it. It's got guiding principles. The recent Mental Health Act review has said that the principles in the code are really good. We should bring them into the Act. They're probably not going to be able to do that, but the principles talk about being least restrictive, people treating people fairly, etc., etc. If more people, I always think that if more people were who were involved in commissioning of this stuff actually either went and did mental health act assessments with AMPs or read the Mental Health Act Code of Practice, the service for people on the receiving end of what this stuff or what we do would be better. You're only supposed to depart from the code for cogent reasons, okay, because most people have never read it. Custody. Custody is an interesting place to go amping, okay. The link on that slide is a link to a BBC report by a reporter called Sean Dilley. that reckons that between 4,000 and 5,000 people every year are languishing in police cells for the lack of a bed. Okay, these are people who've been arrested for offences or assessed in cells by doctors and AMPs. The decision is made that they need to be detained, but because there's no bed or no hospital available, the AMP can't make the application. The pace clock ticks, and these people stay in the cells under no legal or lawful authority. That's an infringement of human rights. It's an everyday experience. You see it also in EDs, emergency departments. C, coroner's reports. Unfortunately, we're involved in this stuff. I've been unlucky enough to be the coroner's report. You should read some of them. This originally, the A to Z was done for police officers, so I do quote some cases. R versus Mumtaz in Ashworth Hospital basically means you should only depart from the code for cogent reasons. Okay, and that'll be the same when the new code. The code is out of date, horribly, by the way. Chapter 16 is completely out of date. D, for doctors. We need doctors to do mental health act assessments. Section 12, doctors. I'm always surprised that mental health act assessments are actually dependent on the attendance of a very well remunerated volunteer. When people are asking the AMPs to come, the AMP has to find a doctor. The AMP has to do some background reading. The AMP just can't rock up and do as what they're told. And in terms of the how much it's costing, I once sat in front of a parliamentary group for social work and explained to them that if we're doing 53,000 detentions, how many people are we actually assessing? Well, no one counts. No one knows how many assessments AMPs actually do, but they reckon it's between 140 or 150,000. If we take the 140,000 figure, it says two things. One, that AMPs are generally not detaining people. They're detaining people about 2/3 of the time, or about 1/3 of the time, and 2/3 of the time saying no. You never get any credit for that, by the way. Okay, no one ever mentions that we say no. We're very good at saying no. AMPs are very pesky. I quite liked it when Soib said about having to deal with doctors. Yeah, I quite like dealing with doctors. I enjoy saying no to them. I'm sorry, I do. But it costs about 25 million quid in Section 12 fees a year. I said to these people, I could save the NHS £100 million over 4 years. Organise your Section 12 doctors differently. I also remind people that the bed is actually the doctor's job, not the AMP's job, although the AMP is often the last one standing. And I describe the system within which we work with. Anyone who's involved in the mental health system will know that it's dysfunctional. It doesn't work very well for the people on the receiving end. Anyone who thinks different, feel free to tell me on Twitter. E stands for experts. I always say, I get wheeled out sometimes as an expert, you know. I'm not. I always say I'm never an expert. I have been around the block several times. I was younger, slimmer, had hair. Okay, I was an ASW. But the only experts are the people on the receiving end of what we do. Remember, the Mental Health Act has no age limit. Okay, the youngest person I've been asked to assess is 7. The oldest person over 100. If all the experts were right, they wouldn't need AMPs. Psychiatry would work. If psychiatry worked, I wouldn't have a job. Everyone would be queuing up to see the doctor and would be taking the medication, and everything would be grand. Okay. In terms of treatment, they reckon that about 1/3 of people respond well to treatment. 1/3 of people intermittently will get better anyway without it, and 1/3 of people will be chronically unwell over a period of time. F stands for forensic. Part 3 of the Mental Health Act. It's a real thing. I have been a forensic social worker. I spent a chunk of my time reviewing out of area patients placed in high security hospitals. It's quite exciting when you're a young social worker. You get to go to Ashworth and Rampton and what's the other place? Ashworth, Rampton. Can't remember. And there's a place in Scotland called Castairs, which takes Scottish patients and patients from Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland and Scotland have separate legislation. Okay. So you need to remember that sometimes when you're dealing with cross-border issues. Social supervision, Section 3741 patients. Social workers do that. Used to always fall to sort of AMPs and ASWs to do it, but more and more they're asking social workers to do it because they're running out of AMPs. So you'll be asked to do that stuff. G stands for CCGs, soon to be integrated care boards. Again, these are the people that are commissioning this stuff. They're the people that are paying for it. You know that they're not reading the code of practice when you have made the decision to detain someone and you ring the ambulance and say, can you come and convey the person to hospital, please? They go, you can wait. I say, how long do you have to wait? We say, we don't know. We're prioritizing our physical health. All that chat about parity of esteem seems to have gone out the window. H, hospitals, beds. Emergency departments are places of safety. Okay, the Mental Health Act says so. The Mental Health Act defines a place of safety in section 1356 and in section 55(1). Okay, I've been to conferences and I've been to all sorts of places where the NHS has argued to its blue in the face that the A&E is not a place of safety. It might not be an ideal place of safety, it might not be all sorts of things, but it is legally a place of safety. Okay, trust me, I'm an amp. Human Rights Act. Always mention that, we forget we do that stuff. We're involved in infringing people's human rights. Because it's a due process, we do it. Because there's protection, the AMP is one of the safeguards, the nearest relative is one of the safeguards, the tribunal is one of the safeguards, but we're involved in infringing people's human rights. And GAC like me can sign a form. I detained someone in 2007 and I happen to know they're still detained. That's a long time. I, interview in a suitable manner. That means I just don't turn up and do as I'm told. Okay, if I'm in a police station or I'm in an ED department or I'm anywhere, I have a legal duty to try and interview the person in a suitable manner, hear their story, hear their side. I often just talk about AMPs being is invisible. Okay, AMPs are invisible in their own, mostly local authorities and within the NHS. The only type of AMPs the NHS tend to want are the ones that say, yes, doctor. Thank you, doctor. They don't get those AMPs very often. So the law says I just don't rock up and do as I'm told by the doctor, or the custody sergeant, or anybody else. Okay, and I have the legal duty to be professional and to be individually accountable for what I do. Some people have talked about this notion earlier on. Iatrogenic harm. It's a thing that we do. Okay, sending people to out of area beds is something that we do. Young black men are overrepresented in the mental health act system, in the mental health system. 4 times more likely to be detained, 10 times more likely to end up in a community treatment order. We're involved in that. I have cut and pasted something into the chat about an article about the Mental Health Act review and what that might look at and what it might mean, and notions around therapeutic intervention and substantial risk and whatever it is. You know, they're trying to get us to detain less people. I'm not sure how it's going to work. J stands for Jones. I have a collection of them. Okay. I have 20 odd of them. Okay, because that's how long I've been in SW now. But the Jones is the law. Again, lots of people don't read it. If you're going to get involved in this stuff, read it and read it again. Lots. That's how you understand it. Also talk to your colleagues. K. A little knowledge goes a long way. Back to reading the stuff. Lots of people become social workers because they want to help people. But actually, what happens when people don't want your help? Okay, social work exists because the local authority has certain duties and responsibilities. Sometimes we have to use the law. So if you're an adult social worker, you've got to know about the Care Act, the Mental Health Act, and the Mental Capacity Act. Okay, the Mental Capacity Act was 2005 enacted in 2007, and people still don't know their way around it. Okay, you need to learn it if you're going to be an adult social worker. Legal literacy, it's a really important thing. You know, if we're going to be involved in people's lives, we need to know what laws we're using and how we're doing it. I'm labouring the point. Read the Mental Health Act and the Code of Practice. It's part of the solution. It allows you to be able to have those arguments with doctors, discussions, multidisciplinary team meetings, things like understanding Section 117, things like understanding when you can use the, these things go to court sometimes. There's recently been court issues around, can you use the Mental Health Act to deprive people of their liberty when they've got, even when they're consenting to it and they've got capacity? No, you can't. You can't use Section 41. You can't use a guardianship, and you can't use a CTO to restrict someone of their of their liberty. That had to go to court because people didn't have the required legal literacy. Part of the solution. M stands for multi-agency partnership working. I often talk about multi-agency partnership working, not actually working. Okay. Between us and the NHS, the police, the ambulance, all sorts of things. M stands for the interface between the Mental Health Act and the Mental Capacity Act. You know, a minefield. M stands for moral panic and moral outrage. Somebody must do something. If anyone ever rings you up and tells you you need to do something, ask them why, and really, and ask them how they expect you to do it, and that takes you back to legal literacy. Okay, moral panic is an old-fashioned term. It's when people object to what people are doing. People are entitled to do what they like. You know, but we're the sort of people that get phoned to say, you know, Mrs. Biggins is doing something. Can you do something about it? Well, I might be able to do something about it. But I'm quite keen on the old-fashioned idea of radical non-intervention. Okay, sometimes doing nothing is the right thing to do. I reference my friend. The picture is Michael Brown. If you're interested in the interface between the police and the mental health stuff, look up Mental Health Cop. He's got a website, really useful. He has just cycled from Land's End from John O'Groats to Land's End, by the way. So he just finished. He did it in 8 days yesterday. N stands for nearest relative. Really, really nerdy, humpy stuff, but actually really important. Is probably going to become the nominated person. It pays to know who your nearest relative is. An important safeguard. Your nearest relative can detain you under the Mental Health Act. Your nearest relative can ask you to be discharged, can order your discharge. Most AMPs tell a really good nearest relative story. I would tell you mine, but I'm going to run out of time, so I'll save you it. But it's quite often psychiatry is a social construct to a degree, okay? And there's a brilliant poster somewhere, if you can look it up. Look up the reasons for detention in an American asylum in the 1800s. If you Google that, it'll give you some it'll take you to a very interesting poster. Masturbation figures highly in it for the reasons for detention. And it's also about, you know, the reason that women get detained as well. Unmarried mothers get detained. The father never gets detained. O stands for ordinary residence. Really important when it comes to Section 13 and really important when it comes to Section 117. If you're really lucky, you'll never get involved in a Section 117 conversation. Again, recently there's been stuff in court that's sort of half clarified it, but you don't really want to get involved in that stuff. But Section 117 is really important because it means you get free aftercare. Okay, I've said to my colleagues, if they ever come for me, please don't mess about with Section 2. I would like to be detained under Section 3, please. And then the house won't have to be sold under me, and my kids will not be able to have their inheritance. O stands for obstruction. Section 129. It's actually an offence to obstruct me. Dear officer, then people aren't being nice to me. I often find myself wondering who's actually obstructing the AMP though. Back to the bed manager, back to the doctor, back to the CCG. Everyone actually thinks that the AMP's job is difficult because of the people we're seeing. Okay. At this point, I put my hands up and said, I have done 2,230 Mental Health Act assessments. Okay. The vast majority of those have gone well. The vast majority of the problems I have not been with the people or the families, have been with the system and the dysfunction in it. P. And then oh, it says P. P stands for police in pink forms. Okay. The police are involved in this stuff because they only have certain powers. The law gives them certain powers under 135 and 136. 135 is a warrant. I can get a warrant. The police officer can come and use the big red key on your door. 136, ever increasing. In the area that I live and work in, Birmingham, there are 1,000 136s every year. There are probably 400 or 500 referrals from custody and counting. No one actually counts, though. No one knows how many referrals come from custody. Not just in Birmingham, all over the country. We don't divide it up that way. And P stands for parking. No one ever cares where the AMP parks. They're always ringing you and telling you need to get there really, really, really quickly. Can you get there quickly? Can you get to the hospital quickly? I say to them, where would you like my colleague to park? Because your car park's really expensive and it's really full. Custody won't let you in. Where do you want me to park? If people were taking AMP seriously, they would always think about where they park. Okay. Q, questions. Ask them. Lots of students in this room. There are no stupid questions. This was designed for police. Just ask them, okay? Your best resource when you're an AMP is your colleagues. When you're newly qualified, ask. R, know the difference between recalling and revoking a CTO. Know what it means and who can do it. Social workers, we always say we're into reflection. So R stands for reflection. And the Mental Health Act review, it's coming, it's done. The white paper will be out next year. I always talk about CTOs. There are two advantages to CTOs. One's to the AMP. We don't recall you. The NHS has to do that itself. When CTOs first come out, I used to get phone calls saying, Tony, you need to recall someone. And I go, no, you need to do that. You get them back to the place of safety and then I'll see them. And we'll consider revocation. There's also an advantage to the patient. It's really hard to get recalled and revoked to another area bad. Not a good reason to be on a CTO, but it is a thing. Sections. Everyone thinks they know what a section is, okay? But there are 149 of them. Most people think of Section 2 and Section 3. There are 149 sections in the Mental Health Act. My favorite section is Section 149. It's literally called the silly section. It means you can use the Mental Health Act on silly. I happen to go to silly on my holidays. That's why I know it. Okay, now. And I am going to mention, I can't even say the word, Serenity Integrated Mentoring. Look up Stop Sim. Okay. Sometimes we get this stuff terribly wrong. SIM was inviting the police to use the criminal justice system to deal with, work with, whatever word you want to use, what are called high intensity users. These are people that are being 136'd and presenting in crisis all the time. The NHS backed this thing called SIM. You should look it up and look up the Stop SIM campaign. It's an example of how a group of people are able to challenge something on a national level. It's sort of like a small group of people who are disempowered banding together and actually managing to do something about something. But SIM has disappeared. Well, the official SIM stuff has disappeared. Whether people are still being subject to the sort of things that are going on, who knows? T stands for street triage. Street triage. Is it the answer? Everyone likes it, but is it the answer? Putting a police officer and a nurse and an AMP in a car sounds like a good idea. What's not to like? But is it part of the solution? Are we asking the right questions? Is the right answer to the wrong question? I don't think street triage needs AMPs. I think they need better access to AMPs, and I don't think street triage needs cops. I think it's filled a gap in crisis services. 70% of street triage is in people's houses. Police officers have no power in your house. She's rushing me on now. U stands for Team 999, again about multi-agency parking, multi-agency team working, not working. AMPs aren't part of Team 999. We don't have radios. We don't get cars with go faster stripes and blue flashing lights. But sometimes we're asked to step into that space. It's incredibly difficult to do it. People want you now. Go back to trying to find that Section 12 doctor. Go back to trying to, do your background information, finding out about people. Go back to, you can't just arrive at something cold and make a really important decision about someone's liberty, in a very short space of time. V stands for voluntary attendance and voluntary admission. Yeah, you keep seeing people who are voluntary attending A&E departments, sometimes in leg restraints. How's that a thing? Sometimes I encourage people accuse the police of overusing their authority. Sometimes they don't use the authority they've got. They're making stuff up. Too many people are making stuff up. And 131, I remind bed managers and remind everybody else that Section 131 is a real section of the Mental Health Act. It's a voluntary admission to hospital. I would like the Mental Health Act to be used in a less coercive way. I would like AMPs to be used in a less coercive way. I would like us to be seen as a positive intervention, not wheeled out as a big stick to which people are going to be detained, because it's only us that can detain them. W stands for warrant. Do you know the difference between a Section 1351 and a Section 1352? AMPs do. Most people don't. 1351 is for someone who is in the community and not already subject to detention. 1352 is for someone who's unlawfully at large, either a detained patient who's gone AWOL or a CTO patient who's been recalled. I say to the police, go and help us out here, please, because they complain about us. We very rarely ring the police, but when we ring them, they say, have you got a warrant? I go, yes, and they still don't help us. And I always remind the police that nowhere ever did Michael Brown ever say no warrant, no police. Okay, he never said that. That's what they heard, but he actually never said that. Sometimes we can't get warrants. Sometimes there isn't time. Sometimes multi-agency partnership working needs to work. X couldn't think of anything. So there's a picture of my dog. That's the Ampound. Dixie's her name. She's a Patterdale Terrier. She's as cute as you like. Much cuter than me. Why? Always ask why. Why are we getting called to it? Why is the thing failing? It's often about systems, and it's often about resources, and it's often about people. Okay. People talked about bias earlier on, etc., etc. Those are all in the mix. I went to a mental health conference in 2017, and it was chaired by Simon Cole, who was the Chief Constable of Leicestershire. Simon Cole is now dead. Maybe took his own life, yet to come out. But Simon Cole stood at the front of this conference and said, people should be angry about the system and how it treats people. People should be angry about how we fail people, how we end up in coroner's courts, because the coroner's courts keep saying the same thing. Multi-agency partnership didn't work. Communication was poor. Section 140 isn't the real thing. All that sort of stuff. And I often end with a poem. I'm not sure you've got time for it. I'm not sure it'll play, but I always encourage people to listen to Dylan Thomas. Do not go gentle into that good night. If you're going to be an AMP, do not go gentle into that good night. Do not become a yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir. Know your Mental Health Act stuff. Know your Mental Capacity Act, and go out and protect people's human rights. There you go. Sonia, dead on time. Siobhan, sorry even. You don't have to play it. It'll overplay. It'll run you over time.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Tony. Thank you for that. It was tonight. I mean, literally every speaker could have filled the whole session tonight. There was so much going on. So great O to Z there. Thank you so much. From the not so grumpy, but I know one of the kindest AMPs that I know is just something I would want to say. And we can tell people another time why. Thank you so much to all of our speakers tonight. One of the things I just realised was we've actually got a lot of Bradford people here tonight. So we have 2 Bradford students on our team, and then we've got Helen and Sawyer both kind of around the Bradford area as well. I was thinking about Bradford got the City of Culture. I can see why there's been so much really rich stuff been shared tonight. So thank you ever so much for everybody coming. It's been one of our longest ever webinars, but there was so much in it. I just felt like I couldn't keep rushing people through, and I feel like I've rushed people, but everybody was fabulous. So thank you so much, everybody, tonight. On the slide, you will see we've got 4 more sessions this season before we take a break for the summer. Next week, we're going to be looking at reflective practice, doing a back to basics. What we're going to do is look at reflective practice in the concept of complexity. We're actually going to look at, in social work, how do you find the simplicity in the complexity? And so there'll be lots of threads coming through from this week into next week. So if you want to join, I think the team will probably be putting into the chat the link for next week's session. But thank you so much to everybody, all of our speakers tonight. I can see everybody saying in the chat, it was a brilliant session tonight, so much, and I think everybody brought a different angle, giving us a really rounded view of mental health social work, because after all, in many ways, mental health social work is the most generic of all social work, because we all have mental health, mental well-being, and so it's something for everybody. So thank you so much tonight, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Good night, everybody. Goodbye.